Before we begin, subscribe if you're ready to hear the stories that keep investigators awake at night. Like the video if you believe the truth always leaves a trace. And comment below what you think really happened, because by the end of this story, you may realize that one simple message can hide something far darker than anyone imagined. On a cold February night in 2014, the quiet college town of Charlottesville, Virginia, looked exactly the way it always did. Streetlights cast soft pools of yellow light onto empty sidewalks. Dorm rooms glowed faintly behind frosted windows. Students laughed somewhere in the distance as music drifted through the freezing air. But in a small apartment near the campus of the University of Virginia, something had already begun to go terribly wrong. 20-year-old Hannah Graham had spent the evening the way many college students did, meeting friends, walking between bars, enjoying a Friday night before classes resumed. Hannah was known among her friends as quiet but adventurous. She loved hiking, photography, and exploring unfamiliar places. Originally from Alexandria, Virginia, she had come to Charlottesville searching for independence and opportunity. Her friends trusted her instincts. She was careful, responsible, and rarely took unnecessary risks. But on the night of September 13, 2014, something changed. Earlier that evening, Hannah had met a group of friends downtown. The area, known as the Downtown Mall, was a popular strip filled with restaurants, bars, and late-night crowds. Security cameras later showed her moving between buildings, smiling, chatting, blending easily into the flow of students and locals enjoying the weekend. For hours, nothing seemed unusual. At around 1:20 a.m., Hannah left one bar and headed toward another. Witnesses would later say she appeared slightly intoxicated but still aware of her surroundings. She tried entering a nightclub but was turned away by security. Moments later, she was seen walking down the brick-paved street alone. Then, at 2:13 a.m., Hannah pulled out her phone and sent a message to one of her closest friends. The message was short, confusing, and it would become one of the most chilling pieces of evidence investigators ever examined. Read, "I'm lost. No location. No explanation. Just 2 words." At first, her friend didn't panic. College students often wandered the downtown area after a night out. Getting lost wasn't unusual. But the strange thing was, Hannah never responded again. Her phone went silent immediately after that message. At 2:20 a.m., security footage from a nearby camera captured Hannah again. She was walking quickly, glancing behind her shoulder as if searching for something, or someone. Next to her, a tall man appeared briefly in the frame. The two walked side by side for several seconds. Then they disappeared into the darkness beyond the reach of the camera. That was the last confirmed sighting of Hannah Graham alive. By the following afternoon, her friends began to worry. Hannah wasn't answering calls. She hadn't returned to her apartment. Her phone went straight to voicemail. One friend tried texting her again. No reply. Another friend knocked on her apartment door. It was locked. Silent. Empty. The uneasy feeling grew quickly. Within hours, her family was notified. By evening, police were contacted. And soon, the entire city of Charlottesville realized something was very wrong. Missing college students weren't unheard of, but Hannah's disappearance felt different. She hadn't simply skipped town. She hadn't left behind signs of travel. Everything about the situation suggested something far more disturbing. Investigators from the Charlottesville Police Department launched a search that would soon capture national attention. Officers began combing through security footage across downtown businesses. Every restaurant, every bar, every ATM camera was checked. Hours of recordings revealed Hannah's movements throughout the night. Piece by piece, detectives reconstructed her final hours. She had walked down the downtown mall. She had spoken briefly with strangers. She had stumbled once while crossing the street. Then came the final footage. The same camera that captured Hannah walking beside the unidentified man. Detectives paused the video frame by frame. The man appeared calm, casual. But something about the way he stayed close to her raised immediate suspicion. Investigators zoomed in on the footage, enhancing the blurry image. He looked older than the average college student, possibly in his 30s. He wore dark clothing and walked with a steady, confident stride. Most chilling of all, he never appeared surprised by Hannah's presence. It was as if he had been expecting her. Within 48 hours, search teams flooded Charlottesville. Hundreds of volunteers walked through wooded trails, abandoned lots, and neighborhoods surrounding the campus. Helicopters scanned the area from above. Police dogs followed scent trails through damp grass and gravel streets. But every trail ended the same way. Nowhere. Hannah Graham had vanished. Meanwhile, detectives continued studying her final text message. I'm lost. At first, it seemed like the kind of message anyone might send after wandering unfamiliar streets late at night. But the deeper investigators looked, the stranger it became. Hannah had lived in Charlottesville for months. She knew the downtown area well. She had walked those streets dozens of times before. So why would she suddenly feel lost? Some detectives believed the message wasn't about location at all. They believed Hannah might have been trying to say something else. Something she didn't have time to explain. As days passed, pressure grew. The case began attracting national media coverage. News stations across the United States reported on the missing college student whose final message had become a haunting mystery. Parents warned their children to stay indoors. Students walked in groups after dark. The peaceful college town began to feel different. Fear replaced normalcy. And detectives knew that somewhere in Charlottesville, someone knew exactly what had happened that night. Then, 6 days after Hannah disappeared, investigators discovered something that would change the entire direction of the case. Security footage from a gas station miles away showed a familiar figure standing beside a car. The man walking next to Hannah in the final video. And once detectives identified him, they realized something terrifying. This wasn't the first time his name had appeared in a violent investigation. Not even close. And suddenly, the search for Hannah Graham turned into a race against a far darker truth. The man in the security footage had appeared for only a few seconds, but those seconds were enough to send investigators down a chilling path. Detectives enhanced the grainy gas station video again and again. Each frame revealed small details, a familiar posture, the shape of his face, the way he leaned against the vehicle like someone who had nothing to worry about. Within hours, analysts ran the image through local databases. Then a name surfaced. Jesse Matthew. At first, the name meant little to the public. He wasn't famous. He wasn't someone the community openly feared. On the surface, Matthew appeared ordinary. He was 32 years old and worked as a hospital technician at the University of Virginia Medical Center. He lived quietly in Charlottesville, driving a gray sedan and maintaining a life that looked stable enough from the outside. But the deeper detectives looked into his history, the more uneasy they became. Matthew had attended Liberty University years earlier but had suddenly left under mysterious circumstances. There had been whispers of troubling behavior during his time there, though nothing had led to charges. More disturbing still, investigators found something else buried in old records. Years earlier, in 2005, a college student named Morgan Dana Harrington had vanished during a concert at the John Paul Jones Arena. Her body was discovered months later on a remote farm outside Charlottesville. At the time, the case had gone cold. But as detectives reviewed the old files, a horrifying possibility emerged. Witness descriptions from that night, 10 years earlier, matched the same man now seen walking beside Hannah Graham. The same height. The same build. The same unsettling presence. Suddenly, what had seemed like a single disappearance began to look like something much darker. Meanwhile, the search for Hannah continued. Volunteers spread across miles of countryside surrounding Charlottesville. Woods were combed. Rivers were searched. Abandoned buildings were inspected. But days passed with no sign of her. Then police made their move. On September 24, 2014, officers arrived at Jesse Matthews' apartment with a search warrant. Inside they found something that immediately raised alarms. His car, the same vehicle seen near Hannah that night. Forensic teams examined the interior inch by inch. Fibers were collected. Dirt samples were taken. Tiny traces invisible to the human eye were carefully sealed in evidence bags. Detectives knew that if Hannah had been inside that vehicle, modern forensic science might reveal the truth. But while investigators gathered evidence, Jesse Matthew was already preparing to disappear. When police attempted to question him later that week, Matthew refused to answer even basic questions. He seemed calm, detached, almost strangely confident. Then something even more suspicious happened. Just days later, Matthew failed to show up for work. His phone went dead. And his car was gone. The man at the center of the investigation had vanished. News of his disappearance exploded across national media. Suddenly, the quiet hospital worker wasn't just a person of interest, he was now a fugitive. Authorities issued an arrest warrant for Jesse Matthew, charging him with the abduction of Hannah Graham. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states joined the search. Highways were monitored. Airports were alerted. Hotels and bus stations were checked. For several tense days, nobody knew where Matthew had gone. Some investigators feared the worst, that he might try to flee the country. Others believed he might attempt something even more dangerous. Then, nearly 1,500 miles away, A small police department in Texas received an unexpected call. A man had entered a restaurant in Galveston acting strangely. When employees became suspicious, officers were called to the scene. The man claimed his name was Jim, but the officers recognized his face immediately. It was Jesse Matthew. The fugitive had been sitting calmly inside the restaurant as if nothing had happened. Within minutes he was placed under arrest. The man suspected of abducting Hannah Graham was finally in custody. Back in Virginia, investigators felt the pressure mounting. Now that Matthew was captured, the focus shifted to a single haunting question. Where was Hannah? Despite intense interrogation, Matthew refused to speak about her disappearance. He sat silently during questioning, staring down at the table. Investigators tried every approach: confrontation, persuasion, evidence, but Matthew remained quiet. Without his cooperation, the search had to continue the hard way. Weeks passed. Autumn leaves began covering the forests outside Charlottesville. The search teams pushed deeper into rural areas, following small clues and faint leads. Then, in October 2014, a volunteer searcher made a discovery in an abandoned property roughly 10 miles from where Hannah was last seen. Hidden among thick brush and fallen trees lay human remains. The scene immediately became a crime site. Forensic teams worked carefully for hours, documenting every detail before removing the remains for identification. Days later, the results confirmed what everyone had feared. The remains belonged to Hannah Graham. The missing college student whose final text message had puzzled investigators was gone. Her disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was now officially a murder investigation. As detectives examined the evidence surrounding Jesse Matthew, the horrifying truth began to emerge. DNA testing connected him not only to Hannah Graham's case, but also to the decade-old murder of Morgan Dana Harrington. For 10 years, the killer had lived quietly in the same city where his victims had disappeared, walking the same streets, working the same jobs, blending into everyday life while carrying secrets no one suspected. But now the walls were closing in. The evidence against him was growing stronger by the day. And soon, prosecutors would prepare to reveal the full story of what really happened the night Hannah Graham sent her final message. But one chilling question still lingered in the minds of investigators. Why had Hannah sent that text? "I'm lost." Was it simply a message sent in confusion after a night out? Or was it a desperate attempt to warn someone that she had encountered the wrong person, at the worst possible moment? That final message, only 2 words long, would become one of the most haunting clues in modern true crime. And in the final chapter of this story, the full truth behind that night would finally come to light. By the time the remains of Hannah Graham were identified, the city of Charlottesville had already been living in fear for weeks. What began as a missing person case had now become something far more tragic. A murder that forced investigators to confront the possibility that a predator had been hiding in plain sight for years. At the center of it all was the same quiet man captured on security cameras the night Hannah vanished: Jesse Matthew. 4 weeks after his arrest, Matthew remained silent. He avoided eye contact with investigators, refused to explain his actions, and declined to answer the one question that mattered most. What happened to Hannah Graham? Prosecutors began building their case without his help. Forensic teams returned again and again to the areas where Hannah had last been seen. They studied security footage from dozens of businesses, piecing together her movements minute by minute. The downtown mall in Charlottesville, normally filled with music and laughter on a Saturday night, had unknowingly recorded the final hours of her life. Camera footage showed Hannah walking unsteadily after leaving a bar. She paused near restaurants, wandered along the brick walkway, and occasionally stopped to check her phone. Then Jesse Matthew appeared. He approached her calmly, speaking to her as if they had already known each other. Witnesses later told police they saw the two walking together briefly. At first, nothing seemed unusual. But investigators noticed something disturbing. Matthew stayed close, too close. He mirrored her movements. When she paused, he paused. When she turned, he followed. It was the behavior of someone carefully guiding another person somewhere. Not someone simply passing by. Then came the final video. The moment both of them disappeared from camera view. That was where the visible trail ended. But forensic evidence would soon reveal what happened next. Investigators examined Matthew's car with extraordinary precision. Every inch of the interior was tested. DNA evidence discovered inside the vehicle confirmed that Hannah had been there. Small fibers from her clothing were found near the passenger seat. Microscopic traces linked directly to her belongings were recovered from the floor. The evidence told a clear story. Hannah had entered the vehicle that night. but it did not reveal whether she did so willingly. Meanwhile, prosecutors were preparing another devastating revelation. DNA evidence had connected Jesse Matthew to the murder of Morgan Dana Harrington, the Virginia Tech student who vanished during a concert at the John Paul Jones Arena in 2009. For years, investigators had searched for the person responsible for Morgan's death. Now they finally had their answer. The same man suspected in Hannah Graham's disappearance had been walking free for years after another young woman was killed in the same city. To prosecutors, the pattern was chillingly clear. Matthew targeted vulnerable victims late at night. He approached them in public places where they appeared alone. Then he isolated them before anyone could intervene. The evidence against him grew stronger every week. In March 2016, nearly 2 years after Hannah's disappearance, Jesse Matthew finally stood in court. The courtroom was silent as prosecutors described the events of that night. They presented the surveillance footage. They explained the forensic evidence. They outlined the connection to Morgan Harrington's murder. Faced with overwhelming proof, Matthew chose to plead guilty to the abduction and murder of Hannah Graham. The courtroom listened as the judge described the severity of his crimes. Jesse Matthew was sentenced to multiple life sentences in prison, ensuring he would never walk free again. For Hannah's family, the verdict brought a measure of justice, but not closure. Nothing could bring their daughter back. Yet one question still haunted investigators and the public alike. Why had Hannah sent that message? "I'm lost." Detectives reviewed the timeline again. At 2:13 a.m., Hannah sent those words to a friend. Minutes later, security cameras captured her walking beside Matthew. Some investigators believed she had already sensed something was wrong. Perhaps Matthew had offered her a ride. Perhaps he had convinced her he was helping. Or perhaps she simply realized too late that she had trusted the wrong person. The message may not have meant she was lost in the streets of Charlottesville. She may have meant something else entirely. Lost in a situation she could not escape. Lost with someone she didn't fully trust. Lost in the final moments before everything changed. The tragedy of Hannah Graham's case left a permanent mark on Charlottesville. Students began walking in groups late at night. Universities expanded safety programs. Police departments across the country reviewed similar cases involving young women disappearing after nights out. And the story of that final message became a chilling reminder of how quickly an ordinary evening can turn into a nightmare. For many people who followed the case, those 2 words still echo years later. "I'm lost." A message sent in the darkness of early morning. A message that seemed simple at first. But in the end, it became the final trace of a young woman who never returned home. And the final clue that helped investigators uncover the truth about the man who had been hiding among them all along. Some crimes begin with violence. Others begin quietly, with a single text message sent into the night. And sometimes, that message is the last thing anyone ever hears.